All right, good afternoon, Mr. Mandel. It has been ages since we've actually sat down, so thank you for joining us. Thank you for being part of this.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to talk about data, data matters, and we're going to start with that classic line from many moons ago, data is the new oil. You know, is that still the case? What do you think?
You know, that was an Economist cover a while back, I think 2017, but the quote actually comes from the guy who did the Tesco loyalty program,
okay,
from Dumbhumby, and I think it definitely applies today, because if you think about oil, by itself, it's not all that useful. It has to be refined, right, to turn it into plastic or chemicals or petrol. Data is similar, because data by itself that's not actionable or structured is not very useful. So it's a great quote.
So you still think data is really relevant, but I mean, not all data matters equally. It matters, but not equally. You know, how can brands, how can advertisers pick the right data, work with the right data, make it matter?
You know, ages ago, I used to be in market research, and I had a boss who said, never ask a question on a survey if you don't know what you're going to do with once you get the answer.
Yeah.
And I think data's similar. It's don't collect data for the sake of collecting it. You have to really understand, like, how are you going to use that data, and how are you going to structure it in a way that makes it usable? And so you're right, not all types of data are equal. You know, we have this whole first party, second party, third party, and now we have zero party, which is really declared data. Like, I tell you something about myself.
Okay.
And so obviously the advertisers and agencies and platforms that have better signals will have a very good competitive advantage. And those who are using perhaps second and third party data will be at a disadvantage. So
we just talked about that. The brands who have the first party data, better advantage. What happens if you don't? You know, where do you start? Is it game over right away? What are the options?
I don't think it's game over, but I think we're entering this sort of transitional phase of the cookie's demise.
Yes.
And my own personal view, but I feel that the cookie is a weak signal. It always has been.
Okay.
And so if you've been over-relying on cookie data and leveraging programmatic, you know, that uses cookies, then it could be a problem, because that's a weak signal to begin with. The issue with the cookie is that originally, you know, it was good for stitching together context. But what we did as an industry is we said, oh, you know what, let's stitch together things that are not contextual. So I go and I visit a certain site, and then, you know, I go to another site and I'm followed, I'm retargeted. Yes. And it's like, wow, so I once looked at cat food to help a friend, and then cat food ads are following me through the internet.
Oh, absolutely.
And I don't even own a cat. And besides, I'm a dog person, for the record.
Always a dog person.
Always a dog person. But, you know, it's also like, if you think about cookies and how we use them, we use them in a way that ultimately pissed off consumers.
Yes.
Imagine going to Harvey Norman and looking at televisions. And, you know, I go and I see a Sony, and I look at it, I touch it, and then I leave the store. And then an hour later, the salesman comes up to me and says, hey, what about that Sony? And I'm like, hey, nice to see you.
Yeah.
You know, and then 2 days later, I'm looking at, you know, buying my Chinese New Year hamper, and that salesman pops up and goes, hey, what about that Sony? And then 5 days later, I'm trying to buy flowers for my wife, and the same, you know, you would do something, you'd probably strangle him. But that's what we did to consumers.
Now, and when you bring it to life that way, it sounds ludicrous, but that's what the ads that follow you around the internet do. You know, and I mean, what we talk about at the WFA, it's not really about having a data strategy, but you've got to have a people strategy. You know, you've got to have a people-first approach. But I want to pick up on what you talked about with the cookieless future. It starts to sound really ominous. It starts to sound like the end of marketing as we know it, but it's not really all that. And doesn't have to be doom and gloom, especially in mobile-first Asia.
You know, there is a bit of a misnomer around that. Like, cookies are not important for mobile. Mobile web does exist, and they are important for that. But then, okay, what about what Apple's doing with IDFA, right? They're coming after, you know, apps in a way that is just the same as the cookie going away, if not worse. Google will likely follow suit in some capacity. So I think, you know, marketers shouldn't ignore this. They have about a year plus to really start laying the foundations to understand this. And ultimately, it's going to take time. But it was a stay of execution when Google said, hey, we're not going to do this.
Yeah.
And I really hope people take this seriously, because if they don't, they will have an issue.
So what in your opinion, what are the, well, there are options, there are solutions, you know, what are your thoughts on that? What would you pick? What do you recommend?
Well, I think, you know, going back to this sort of data as oil, if you think about a car engine, right?
Okay, yeah.
An engine needs oil, right?
Yes.
If you don't put oil into the engine seizes, and then you break it. So data alone requires some sort of data management platform, consumer data platform, whatever you want to call it, but you need to have a platform. You have to start thinking about, all right, I'm going to start collecting first-party data. I'm going to have a value exchange to get that data. We can talk about that in a sec.
Yeah.
But I'm ultimately going to put it into my engine. Now, if you put bad oil into an engine, then it's not going to perform very well. But also, if you have an engine that's not powerful and you put great data into it, or great oil, then you're not going to get peak performance. So you can't think of data alone. You have to also think about leveraging which types of platforms can help you actually get access to the data that you need to use to be an effective marketer. And you know, there's definitely platforms out there, and hopefully we're one of them. But I think that's really what our mission is that we want to give people access to our data in a safe way that does not obviously, you know, break any policy or regulations, but at the same time allow them to actually communicate with consumers in an engaging way that's not like the salesman, you know, popping up throughout your life in non-contextual moments.
No, that contextual, you know, you just talked about that. I mean, it sounds like a lot to think about. It sounds like a new concept, but really it's not, if you think about it.
I mean, like, you have a fashion product, so you put it in a fashion magazine, like Elle. Yeah, you know, it's true. It's pretty simple, but I wonder if there's enough contextual placements out there to scale cheaply, because I think a lot of marketers are used to cheap clicks, and they can get scale by driving programmatic. But you know, one of the issues is when you only have to do context, your choice of platforms will be more limited because they'll only be contextual. And then at the same time, it might be more expensive, because if there's limited platforms, then the CPMs or CPAs or CPCs will go up. And so I think for advertisers, you have to think, how do I enrich the context beyond the context itself? Which is kind of, it's not like a Jedi mind trick, but what do I mean by that is, like, if I give you an example, how do you actually take creativity, context, and like commerce and blend it together?
Yes.
And so the example I have is a Grab example, so sorry, but it's the one that's top of mind, where in the Philippines, for Knorr, the Unilever brand, we were thinking about how to bring context to Knorr product.
Okay.
Now, consumers are locked up. They're, you know, not in jail, but they're locked up in the pandemic, and ultimately they need to order food. Obviously, Grab delivers food, but we also have GrabMart, and we can deliver ingredients so that they can make food. Right? You don't have to always have Grab food. You can order food through GrabMart. And so what we did is we showed 5 recipe cards, and once the consumer selected the recipe they liked, all the ingredients would auto-populate into GrabMart.
Perfect.
And then you can just buy it and that would come.
Okay.
Or you could deselect the ingredients you already had.
Right.
So that's like context, but it's also creative, right? And it's commerce. And so that enriched the contextual channel. And I think that's what people need to think about.
No, and I love that you started talking about creative, because a lot of times with programmatic, or at least, the common sell with programmatic is the right ad, the right time, the right message, the right audience, right price. But if you hadn't thought about creative, and if you get all of that right, but it's a dreadful piece of work, then that's kind of pointless if you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, again, like my own personal view here, but I feel like we mastered media placements at scale, but we never mastered as an industry creative placements at scale.
Right.
So what we ended up doing is we said, all right, we have all these media placements, but we never cracked dynamic creative, optimization or DCO. So what happened is you took the same copy, the same creative, and you just pushed it everywhere, which only agitated consumers more. And so if we had balanced it better to say, hey, we have all these media placements that are not necessarily as contextual as we'd like, but at least the creative and the copy fit the moment. But no, we didn't keep pace with that. And the unbalance is why it's going to end badly.
Yep. I mean, I will say we're seeing some really great examples of DCO in China, but you've got to work at it and think about it, and I really think about the consumers. Speaking of which, I mean, can brands really get that single point of view, of the consumer? Is that nirvana attainable for everyone, or only a select few?
Again, I think if I can reframe it a bit, it's like, sure, having a single view of a customer sounds magical, especially if you're a direct-to-consumer brand. But the reality is, as a B2C marketer, you don't really need that, right? B2B maybe for a very high consideration purchase, but for a B2C marketer, what you really need is data in aggregate. It could be anonymized. I don't need to know it's Ranji. Right? I just need to know you're vegetarian, and I don't have to try and sell you steak, right? So I don't waste my impressions.
Yeah.
And so, do I really need any PII? No. I just need an aggregate, the data that allows me not to waste the impression, and to get something in front of you that you're actually going to engage with. And so I think it's a bit of a misnomer to say we need to get to that single view of a customer.
So it's actually understanding as a brand what you need, as opposed to, right, this is the nirvana, let's go chase that. Maybe we don't need that. Maybe we need something else, and that's better for the business. Yeah,
I mean, if you go back, to the automobile example, at one point, we won't want the Porsche with the engine. We're going to want the Tesla, right? And I don't know what the Tesla of marketing becomes, but ultimately, there will be another way to do tracking that is going to be respectful of the end consumer. And that really is the issue, is that I don't think as an industry we were respectful of that. We did things that were good for ourselves as agencies and brands, but I don't know if we really thought about what the impact was on consumers, hence the backlash.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think once you put the consumer back in the heart of it, and that becomes the litmus test, like, we're doing this, does it bring a benefit? Does it add value? We talked about the value exchange. What are your thoughts about that? How do we get better at that?
So value exchange, I mean, it's a term that a lot of people talk about, but I remember when I joined Grab, and I had to formulate a strategy around the ad business. And I looked at all the assets that Grab had, and I zeroed in on the Grab points and rewards. And I said, well, there's something to be used in a value exchange. So if you watch a rewarded video on Grab, you get 50 points that you can then apply to whatever you want to do. A cheaper ride, cheaper food, or maybe you redeem it for an item in the catalog in the loyalty program. And I remember a senior marketer said to me, but you're just bribing people. And I was like, fair point, but you just spent $2 million on a TVC production or whatever. And so you want people to watch it from the beginning to the end.
Yeah.
That is, what a rewarded ad does. And of course, it doesn't have to be just a rewarded ad. You could do a rewarded survey, provide a few answers, and then you get, again, some points. Or rewarded conversion, right? Fill out a credit card application form, and then we can actually fire off that pixel and then add a reward into the account of that person. So we're using our reward program to create a different type of advertising that creates a value exchange.
Okay, so there's actually skin in the game for the viewer, for the consumer.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I think you talked about this just the point earlier that we as an industry aren't exactly doing the right things for the consumer. How can we then as an industry work better together? How can brands, agencies, partners, come together for that?
Yeah, the answer is actually simpler than you would think. And it goes back to saying, okay, think like a consumer who's experiencing the ads. If you put the consumer or your customer in the center of your strategy, you're probably not going to go wrong. But once you remove the consumer from your strategy and you're thinking only about how to drive ROI for yourself, you're going to have a problem. But it doesn't mean that the ecosystem is going to come together naturally. But I think if everyone starts thinking about the end user or the end receiver of the content that they're creating or whatever, then things start falling into place.
Right.
And if you don't do that, then consumers will turn you off in some way.
I know you're right. And you're not thinking, okay, how much do I need to upsell at this point of my business services? How much more ad space do I need to sell? I've got a bad quarter. I need to push a little bit more out. I want to sell you my product, but thinking, is this going to make the individual's life better? That'll keep us on the right track.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's going to make someone's life better, but it should at least not make it worse.
Indeed. That's a start. If we can do that, that's a start.
Yeah.
So, okay, we are, I'm going to say, less than 50 days away from the new year. I can't believe it. It's a new month next week. What does 2022 look like when it comes to data? What trends do you see? What do you predict?
I think I said a little bit about it earlier. It is a transitional year. And I think the transitional year is going to move into 2023 as well.
Okay.
As Apple goes through their changes, Google applies various changes, marketers are going to have to get used to what it means to operate in a world, without the cookie. But also, IDFA is a challenge. It actually starts blending in, not blending, but it impacts email marketing as well. So it's just like a cascades, and you got to get your head around it. I do think, though, post-pandemic, and hopefully we are post-pandemic in 2022.
I hope so.
I really hope so. And you're going to see a resurgence of retail media at physical retail. Okay. People are certainly going to still buy online. That habit is here to stick. But let's face it, especially in Southeast Asia, people like to go to malls. They like to get out of their homes.
Yes, air-conditioned malls, please, in Singapore.
Air-conditioned malls, and then have some food. So the shopping experience is going to come back with a vengeance. But what I think a lot of advertisers who pivoted to digital and got the digital religion, they're going to miss the accountability at physical retail that they had with digital. Because there's a gap, right?
Yeah.
You can't close the loop as easily as you can digitally through, let's say, e-commerce. And so I think you'll see online to offline, and especially the attribution, be a very re-emerging trend, because I think it's not a new trend, but it's going to re-emerge with a vengeance because people are going to want accountability. And so, for us, again, we're going to look at the assets that we have, GrabPay, see an ad on the app, be offered a reward, store that reward. When you go to the physical point of purchase, you buy that product, and then we can see when you use GrabPay, that purchase, we've closed the loop at the point of sale. And we're already running that, we did pilots with Laneige and Kiehl's and others, and we've seen really interesting results. And then the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
So we're very keen to get that going again, because if you can close the loop at the point of physical sale, that is the holy grail.
No, you're right. We were just talking about it over lunch, that there is so much to think about when it comes to the metaverse, but hashtag IRL, right? In real life, we're going back to stores, we're thinking about that full integrated experience. And no, I'm with you on that. I think that's definitely got to be something brands think about in 2022.
IRL in real life.
Jasper taught me that.
Jasper's so smart.
And on that note, I'm going to say thank you. We couldn't have wrapped up on a better note.
We're going to end on Jasper so smart. Oh, that's awesome. All right.
Jasper matches. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you, Ranji.
Give you a fist bump because we can't be more than socially.
You got to do the thing. Come on. Yeah, there we go.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.